I would suggest don't put the values up on the wall. Instill the values within your people.
Yeah.
Right. An example of you say, how do we get this done in organizations? Right. There's plenty of other things that we can talk about and all those hard elements of the way work gets done. Right. There's plenty to be discussed within that category. But let's talk about the values alignment piece, because this is critical. Right. If you have to have the person alignment, you have to have the skills and capabilities alignment. And those go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other to have a successful workforce and individuals in the organization. So.
All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Business Blind Spots Exposed podcast. I'm going to call it Blind Spots because the other title is really long. But in this episode of the Business Blind Spots Exposed, in this Blind Spots podcast, I've got a really interesting guest, Ben Wiant, who I want to introduce you to. Hey, Ben, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Vinay. Thanks for having me.
Good. I'm happy to have you. I'm really excited about our conversation today, and the topic of our conversation today is culture, how things get done around here. But today we get Ben Wiant. Culture, how things get around here. There's so much chatter and talk about culture and how much it matters, and I feel like it's something that people have talked about as a really squishy topic for a long time. But there's been a huge body of evidence around it for a long period of time, and it can make a huge impact in your organization. And that's why I invited Ben to come and talk to us, because that's his expertise in his area. So let me tell you real quick, just so you can hear me, stop hearing me talk and start to listen to Ben. I'm going to read a little bit from his bio here, just to give you a little bit of who he is. Ben has been helping organizations achieve business goals and improve organizational performance for over 20 years now. Specific emphasis has been on people and process and organizational culture and the design of that culture. He's worked on huge business transformation projects, most notably are Procter & Gamble and HP. Huge organizations, lots of moving parts, lots of different people in the mix. How do you put them all together? How do you manage those enterprise technology projects where you've got to integrate agencies and various components and stakeholders into an organization to all be on the same sheet of music? It's a non-trivial task. He's learned the ropes of entrepreneurism, and he worked with a nutraceutical manufacturer. He's sold outsourced IT services. He's worked with small and medium-sized businesses and recruited mid to senior level professionals in a number of different industries. He started his own company back in 2020 called 3 Doors Job Search to support professionals in job transition by training them on fundamentals of a successful job search. The common thread I hear throughout all of this is people and their value and how they fit into the bigger picture. Ben, did I do a good job of kind of wrapping this huge multiverse of things that you've done and kind of where it all centers around? Is that a fair way assessment of it?
Absolutely, Vinay. Yeah, I've done a lot of different things. Not a traditional career path, but all of which has been very beneficial. And all started with studies of cultural anthropology during my undergrad. I had a very keen interest in why do humans do what they do at a very basic level, cross-culturally and globally. And then I went out into the work world and found out that I didn't like working for people that had problems and weren't interested in solving them. And so I went to graduate school to gain that skill set and fell back in love with the assessment and the study of culture, specifically within organizations and how that impacts human performance within the workplace. And then, as you've described, I've gone down many different paths and been able to experience different cultures and different size organizations. And love talking about it.
So they say history repeats itself, right? And I believe that statement. So if you started with cultural anthropology, then all these cultural issues that we're having today, are they really new?
We don't change a whole lot as a species. If you think about it over the longer course of time, we encounter problems, we create solutions, we organize ourselves. Previously, it may have been in families or tribes, communities, towns, cities, nations, companies, work groups, armies, militaries. right? We organize ourselves in different ways for different purposes over time. And there's some fundamentals that are at the foundation of every single one of those types of organizations. And it all boils down to humans and their motivations and the way that they interact with one another and how they get things done.
So I'm what I'm hearing here, what I'm distilling out of this is, gosh, doesn't matter what country, what period of time that we have been in, there are some basic grouping methodologies, grouping constructs or structures that keep occurring again and again and again. And we may call it army, we may call it a company, we may call it a community or neighborhood, but it just persists throughout time. And all that distills to is that humans have these fundamental motivations and interactions with each other. And that's what really drives anything. Is that a fair way to put that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And without diving too deep down the rabbit hole of human psychology and how we measure our motivations and how those drivers all come into play, there are certain elements that will always be persistent. We layer on levels of sophistication in the way that in the language that we use to describe it, in the technologies or the tools we use to facilitate it. But at its core, it's still all about human interaction and in the way that humans create hierarchies or structures in order to reduce chaos, mitigate pain in the largest sense, and to increase productivity, positivity, positive outcomes. Those are generally the outcomes that folks are looking for and groups are looking for when it comes down to their cultures and the way that they organize themselves.
So we created this topic, or we set up this podcast, and that the specific topic was culture, how things get done around here. I mean, I think we're already starting to touch on this, right? Humans organize themselves in a way to solve some problems, some pains, some challenges, and what their motivations are and how they interact with others is how those things fit together is how, and those groupings of those people is how things get done. Is that a fair way to write? Is that a fair way to say that?
Correct. And if we start at present day and we start talking about organizations in the form of corporations or companies or nonprofits, any type of organization in the modern sense. So if we skip forward to that point, we really have to start with, what is the purpose of an organization, right? What problem is it solving? What value is it adding to society? We hope that that's the intent behind all organizations, that they're adding some type of value and not detracting value from the global scene. But then we've got to think about it in terms of, okay, how are we going to build this organization in terms of achieving that purpose, right? We generally have to establish some type of vision. We've got to then derive a mission out of that. We've got to then design an organization that can fulfill that promise of that vision and that mission. We've got to align our organizations to make sure that the work and the people and the resources are all in alignment with the accomplishment of that vision and that mission and delivering on that purpose to society. And so that's where we have to start in terms of thinking about, why does the organization exist and how will it add benefit or value to humans, ultimately are the beneficiaries of whatever an organization does. And then we kind of look at it from another level, and we've got to start talking about that interaction piece, right? We're talking about why we exist, right? That's an organization's why, what I just detailed. But we start with thinking about, well, how do the humans behave at a more high level, right? What are their values? What are the ethics? What are their attitudes, right? Now we're getting into things like kindness and respect and honesty and perseverance and grit and all the different ways that we characterize human behavior in the workplace. And it's interesting because culture can emerge or culture can be directed, right? And in emergent culture, and we can't necessarily put a bad or good label on culture. Culture is what it is, right? It's a set of expectations, of beliefs, of behaviors, of communications that allow us to be productive in a collective sense towards some common end. And so those things will emerge over time. If you don't attend to it, if you don't create your own culture will emerge, and you may be at the mercy of that culture, or you may be the beneficiaries of that culture, right? Depending upon how it emerges organically. But those leaders that are thinking about their organizations and thinking about what they want their organization to be 1, 5, 10, 50, 100 years down the road, those folks are going to need to design their culture in an intelligent way to make sure that who they are as a founder or who they are as a leader of that organization, what is the ethos of that organization? What is the lifeblood of that organization? What type of people do they want to bring into that organization that align with that, while still hopefully bringing in a diversity of ideas and practices that will benefit the organization and then the beneficiaries of what those organizations deliver. And so once we define why we exist, and then understanding the who of that we want in those organizations, at least at a high level, it then becomes the stories that we tell, right? And you alluded to this earlier, the stories that we tell about who we are as an organization, who we are in relationship to our customers, what the value is that we add, right? All of those emerge out of that collective of people, feelings, processes, interactions, and deliverables. Right? And then we build stories around those. Marketing would grab hold of some of those and use those in order to attract new people to buy goods or services. We create our culture and our understanding of who we are as a group within the business based on those stories that we tell ourselves. A quick example of this, I thought this was a very, and you'll probably hear me allude to this organization a couple of times. The talent acquisition firm that I worked with for 6 years did a fantastic job of creating the culture, right? The company's name was actually an acronym for their core values. It was very intentionally designed, and the organization hired people first and foremost that aligned with the values, not with based on, they had to have some core capabilities, but we didn't hire people from the industry. We hired people that aligned with the values because we could train them to do what it is that we needed them to do, but we couldn't train them to be the people that we needed them to be. And so that was a very interesting organization. And one of the things that the founder of the company would do when new people would join the organization is he would tell the story from his perspective, of the origin story, if you will, of the organization and how it came to be from his mind, and then actions that followed. And he always wanted everybody that joined the organization to drink the Kool-Aid, but he wanted them to make their own flavor of the Kool-Aid and serve it to others, right? So he didn't want everybody to share his origin story in the way that he told the company's origin story. He wanted them to tell their version of it. He wanted them to start with their point in time when they joined the organization and tell their version of the origin story of the organization, to make it real, to make it grow organically, to have meaning to the individuals that were within the organization and who could potentially join the organization or work with the organization in the future. It was a fascinating way to think about those stories that we tell ourselves and that we tell each other that help create that cohesion within an organization. I thought that was a very interesting path to getting to those stories that he put together.
So this is really interesting because just before I got on this podcast with you, I just finalized that I'm going to pull the trigger on a brand new executive assistant. And I've told them a little bit about myself, but in the job posting, I call it the best executive assistant job ever. And I guarantee them that this will be the best job ever. And the reason why is because I said, here are our core values, right? This is what it means to me. And I asked them, what matters to you? And if people respond back with, hey, they don't even talk about the core values, not so interested, right? But if some of them says, well, I mean, there are people who categorically responded to them saying, wonder is one of the fourth core value for connection, and then wonder. They say connection is important, more important than ever in this day and age, and wonder because there's so much I don't know. My gosh, I'm starting to already align with this person because they like what I like. I'll teach them the rest. So it's really interesting what you're just saying. I just went to this lady who I'm bringing on board in this particular role, and after the first conversation that I had with her, which was last week, she said, I went and told my husband after I had this call, this is the best interview I've ever done in my life. And Vinay, you don't realize how much I've been waiting for you to call me back because I've been looking at the universe just saying, I got to work with Vinay. I got to work with Vinay. I've got this person on the other side of an interview who can't wait to come on board. And she had already prepared things. She's already made some talking points. You know, there's a saying that I use all the time. I can pay people for their minds, but if I get their hearts, I win. I got her heart, right? And that's the win there. And I think that's kind of what I'm hearing out of all of what you're saying here is if you start with this why we exist, and then you start to think about the who exist, and then we start all saying the same story, gosh, we're just connecting on a much more sustainable. I mean, that's a buzzword a lot of people use. Much more sustainable, much more scalable level. Is that a fair way to characterize that?
And absolutely. And if you think about the statistics that are out there, it's a staggering at the surveys are showing right now in today's environment, which is a bit different than maybe a couple of years prior. But in previous years, we've said that anywhere between 50 and 60% of people would be interested in joining a new organization, leaving the one they're at. Right now, there's some data out there that's saying that 80 to 90% of people are planning on quitting their jobs and moving to a new organization this year. So, and oftentimes there's a lot of different variables that people are making those decisions off of, but that means that there's a lot of people in the wrong organizations, right? Because you can think about work in two ways. You can think about a place where you can add value in that you're valued, or you can think about it as a place that you show up, you complete tasks, and you earn a wage. Right. And I think a lot of people think about that work level piece as opposed to the value add level of the organization. Right. What is the value that they add and how are they part of that chain of results, as opposed to I show up, I do a task and I get paid for it. Right. And I think if we put those at two ends of a spectrum, I would argue that the folks that are on the I trade hours for dollars without any broader context or rationale as to why I'm there or the value that I'm adding and the lack of connection to the outcomes of the organization, that those folks would change organizations at the flip of a hat, right? And then the people that are at the other end that are bought in, they understand their value, they're valued, they might not even like the work at times. We don't always like all the things that we do in our work, right? So I think that's kind of a baseline assumption that we have to start with as well. But those folks will be more loyal, will be more engaged because they understand where they fit in and that they're not just a cog in the machine that is expendable or replaceable to somebody else to trade their hours for dollars. And so it's interesting that you brought up the experience that you're having hiring this executive assistant, because you're thinking about this in terms of culture add, I would believe, as opposed to the culture fit. And culture fit is oftentimes code for we want people like us, and allows people's biases to come into their decision making, as opposed to thinking, how will this person improve, extend, expand, morph in a positive way our culture, our team, our delivery, our engagement with our customers, right? What is the hiring for culture add versus culture fit is the way that I believe people should think about the new people that they're bringing into the organization. And what you were also talking about is creating a candidate experience early in the process that people can get excited about, right? This person wants to, she's asking the universe for her to join, her to be selected to join you because of the way she feels about the way that she'll be valued in the organization, the way that the organization will operate, and that she knows that she's going to be more than just a cog in the machine. And so I think that candidate experience that you're talking about, and if you have a well-structured and efficient interview process that is selecting people based on the relevant variables that will help a company be successful and eliminating those irrelevant variables that oftentimes come in and bring bias into those decision-making processes, then your attraction and your selection of new people into your organization will lean more towards a value add, because you're thinking about the resources or the humans that you're bringing into your organization in a much different way. You're valuing them as a whole, other than just their skills or their capabilities.
So I like this idea of the culture ad versus the culture fit, because at least the way I think, and I'm kind of curious about your thoughts on this. For me, as the CEO of CAARMO, right, to where this company that's starting to grow, starting to expand, there are things that I know, and there's a whole bunch of stuff I know I don't know, and then there's a whole universe of stuff that I have no idea that I don't know. And it's not my job to know all that stuff. Rather, it's my job to find the people who know that stuff. Right. So if you look at in some from that universal sort of perspective, the culture ad is adding more people who sit in the space that I have no idea about because they're looking at it from a different perspective. It makes me, in my simplistic language here, it makes me more bulletproof because I've got perspective that I didn't have before, as opposed to culture fit saying, hey, you're standing and looking at you see the top of the mountain from north looking south. Hey, I want you to come stand right next to me and look north looking south. Somebody else needs to stand on the other side of the mountain. And I don't know if the analogy is working here, but it's all about ultimately perspective, right? We want more perspective so we're never surprised. And a culture ad is this idea that you're creating a culture so you don't get blindsided. Does that resonate with you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's all about bringing in a multifaceted perspective within your workforce. And if you've created that alignment properly in terms of who the individuals are and how they align to the work, how that aligns to the mission, the vision, and the purpose of the organization, right? If you've got all that in alignment and then you bring in multiple perspectives that positively impact that alignment and that path that the organization is moving down, then you'll have much greater innovation. You'll have much higher levels of engagement. You'll create an inclusive community within your workforce because the diversity of their viewpoints or the different things that they bring to the values and the way that they behave in alignment with those values. Not everybody, exhibits kindness in the same way, right? So if you're only, just as a simple example, if one of your core values of your organization was kindness, and you were only hiring people that exhibited kindness in one way, you'd end up with a pretty vanilla organization at the end of the day, right? But if you have people that exhibit that value in a variety of ways, you'll have this very robust energy of kindness exuding from your organization and not just one flavor of it. That's a simple example of it. But yes, bringing in those multiple viewpoints, whether it be how to do things, how to look at things, how to innovate, how to create, how to sell, whatever it may be, how to exhibit the values of the organization, all that diversity of viewpoints and behaviors, so long as they're still all in alignment, right? Alignment is a key element to culture. So long as those are all in alignment, you'll end up with a much more robust workforce and organization at NED.
A couple of things that are floating through my head as you're saying this stuff. Quite a few things actually. Let me try to see if I can break them in down some order. First of all, you've been in and around this space. You've studied this space. You've taken a look at sort of the historical perspective on this space. Building culture. Culture to me seems like it's regarded as a squishy topic by a lot of folks, right? But I don't know that it's that squishy, right? I don't think it's that soft. I think there's a hard impact that comes from when you pay attention to your culture. Can you give me some insights into what you have seen, what you've learned, what you believe around maybe that harder impact around shaping a culture?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you think about the squishy aspects, right? So let's get those out of the way real quick, right? How people feel is important, right, in the workplace, but how you create that feeling is where the differentiator comes in. Do you make them feel good about the workplace because you have beanbags and foosball tables and keg beer available after 4 p.m. and that you have social groups and free bananas or whatever it may be that the organization provides in terms of the trappings of the office place, right? Open PTO policies, right? Those are great. I worked at an organization with an open PTO policy, and 9 out of 10 times I mentioned that to anybody, the question becomes, "Oh, yeah, those never work because they never allow you to actually take them." I bet you took less vacation days once they implemented that. Exactly the opposite, because the culture of the organization was there needs to be an integration between your life and work. There needs to be time for you to unplug and recharge, right? And the fact that you were encouraged to actually take those days. Like if you weren't taking it, you were told you need to take vacation days. Like it was because there was a value in doing it, right? Whereas other people use it as a hook to bring people into the organization. But then the cultural organization is that, no, you don't actually take vacation days, and you work after hours, and you work on the weekends, and this is the way it gets done around here, right? Regardless of what they say when they're trying to attract candidates and to become new employees with the organization. So this gets
so let's dissect that for a second, because there's a conflicting message that comes out of that, right? I mean, that's really the key of this, right? You bring this person in and say, hey, we've got a open PTO policy. You can leave whenever you want. But then you walk in the door. Yeah, but that's what we say, but that's not really what we mean, is the message that comes across to those employees. Well, then what else are they perceiving, or what else are they hearing with that lens of, yeah, they're saying that, but they don't really mean it. That's the kind of the crux of it. Am I getting that right?
The phrase lip service doesn't exist for no reason.
That's right. Yeah,
right. I mean, we're seeing this happen in current events over the last year, right? A lot of companies have given lip service to diversity, have given lip service to, not spending money with organizations that they don't agree with their values on. But if you look at what's happened 6 to 12 months afterwards, they're not doing anything to really take action on diversity in their workplaces. They're still giving money to those organizations because they benefit their business, even though they don't align with their values. So they gave lip service to these social trends or these social issues, but in reality, they don't take the action in any type of meaningful or long-term capacity. And so that tells you more than you need to know about an organization's culture of whether or not they do what they say they're going to do. And this also then gets to the point of leadership in the top of the organization. If the top of the organization is not adhering to the values, the ethics, the mores, the processes, why would anybody else in the organization adhere to them either? Right? So it's very important for leaders to exhibit those types of behaviors. I mean, it can be as simple as if the bot manager or the CEO are sending emails after midnight on a regular basis, well, that makes people feel, if they're not sending emails at all hours of the day and night, that they're not up to standard, right? So it kind of cuts both ways in that organizations and leaders within those organizations need to model the behaviors that they want, and they can't be the outlier, right? They've got to model the behaviors so that everybody else knows that that's the way things get done around there. So you can say to your workforce, we value your home life, and we don't want you to feel like that you have to, watch your phone, after the time you get home, by the time you show up the next morning. But then if the behaviors are that you're being reached out to during that period of time that they say that they value, and they're the what they say is not matching what they do. Yeah. Right? And this happens on so many different variables within organizations. Now, the phrase "practice what you preach" comes to mind, right?
Now, I gotta imagine there's a bunch of people who could take exception to this stuff, right? And they can say, "Look, this is all nice, fluffy, wonderful, kumbaya, kind of stuff." But I don't think you're saying you can't do things. It's just what is the repeated behaviors, right? Sending an email out at 12 o'clock at night over the course of a week because you got a major project running. Okay, I think people can understand that. But if you send out emails at 12 o'clock at night or 1 o'clock in the morning because you're the CEO or the leader of a company that just can't sleep at night, and you say, "Hey, how come I haven't gotten a response?" Then it's 8 o'clock in the morning. Well, why are you asking that question, right? What is the point that you're trying to get across? I think that's kind of what I'm sort of reading between the lines here. Absolutely. You got to understand where you're coming from and what are you trying to actually achieve in doing that. That's part of establishing the culture. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so let's talk about some of those hard aspects of the culture as well. A lot of people don't know how to talk about culture because they're thinking about it in these more fluffy ways that it's been characterized over time, right? The startup movement has, in order for them to attract folks that are willing to join for equity as opposed to higher pay, right? They've got to give them perks. And these perks have become part of what is defined as the culture of that company. But really, at the end of the day, we need to start thinking about, How are resources allocated? Are people expected for resources to be pushed to them, or are they expected to pull resources? Right? What is the determination and decision making on who gets what within the organization in terms of resources? How do people communicate? Right? I was just talking to somebody who joined a new organization, one of my clients, and he says, I'm trying to get used to how they actually communicate here because it's very distributed. Everything's public. We use all these different public type of Slack channels where there's not a whole lot of private conversation to where you can hammer things out before it goes public. What is the communication model within the organization? Is everybody use the phone? Does everybody use email? Or is everybody using Messenger? Are you using all of these things to where it now becomes a mess of where to find the information or the communications, and how can those threads be followed and be shared with the rest of the organization so that everybody is on the same page? How does an organization develop teams? Is it a matrixed organization? Is it a hierarchical organization? Is it project-based? Is it defined teams? Is it, what are the formal processes and the informal processes? If you think about, there's lots of studies that show, in architectural design and landscape planning, there's all these right angles of sidewalks and whatnot, but you always find the informal ways of navigating through those spaces. There's always those trails through the grass where people cut the corners, right? These same things happen in organizations. You may have a defined way of doing things. You may have formal processes, but people will always find the path of least resistance. And if those formal processes don't make sense, informal processes will emerge, right? So those are all about how things get done. Who are the go-to people in the organization, right? Who are the people whose opinion and input and direction matters? And why does it matter coming from those individuals? And what's the power and leverage structure within the organization, right? Is it a flat organization where everything's done by consensus, or is it a top-down hierarchical command and control type of organization? What are the management styles? Is it laissez-faire? Is it management by walking around? Are they using a particular management philosophy structure? What are the expectations? We already touched on this, right? With PTO and work from home and after hours expectations, right? What are the expectations within the organization and when work is supposed to be done or expected to be done or can be done? How are decisions made? Is it top down, consensus, bottom up? Are formal needs assessments conducted when something needs to change or action needs to be taken or decision needs to be made? How does the organization evaluate itself and then improve itself? Is it a performance? What's valued more in the organization, performance or compliance, innovation or compliance? What is the business model and the priorities? Is it a cost-driven organization? Is it a profit-driven organization? Is it a time-driven organization? What is most important in terms of the way things get done and the way that value is delivered to customers? All of these change the individual day-to-day activities that people do. If my job is to mitigate costs and that is the only thing I'm tasked with, well, time is going to have to be flexible, right? This is the three-legged stool of project management, right? What is our customer engagement and what kind of dialogue are we having with our customers to inform the way that we serve them better? What is the career paths and the advancement opportunities within the organization? And how do I move through those? How are people trained and developed, right? All these are, the nuts and bolts of how organizations get things done, and the definitions and the behaviors and the practices that emerge within each of these categories determines what the actual culture is and how people feel about the organization as a result.
So I think what I heard here is that a lot of people associate culture with feelings. What I think they're missing is there's a bigger picture. It's not about the feelings, but how you get them there to have those feelings. That is what culture is all about. It's the whole idea. I mean, the thing that keeps popping into my head here as you're talking is this idea of no man left behind, in the military. I think you could make an argument here. Who in their right mind, when someone's firing machine guns at you, is going to stop and say, all right, let me turn around and go get somebody who's on the ground there? That's not something that you voluntarily just say, that's the right thing to do. Well, it might be the right thing to do, but that's not something I want to do. But because the right environment was put in place, that's not even a question, right? That's my duty to this organization. This is what I'm supposed to do. This is what I am here for. So you stop, you turn around, even though it's something that scares the bejesus out of you, and you go run right back in the face of fire to pick up that buddy, the person who is just part of your group, your organization, and say, let me pick you up and take you out of here. right?
Absolutely.
That's culture, right? Because they feel like that is their duty. They feel like that is what they're supposed to do. And it's so ingrained in them that they do the right thing, even in the face of something that could be a life or death situation. Am I capturing that properly?
Absolutely. They it's drilled into them that we don't leave people behind, right? This is not acceptable, right? So this also gets into the rules that are established, the protocols that are established, and depending upon how those are iterated and how those are communicated and how much that becomes part of the way they talk about what they do, and then in actuality how they behave in accordance with that, that then becomes one of the driving forces in the construct of the military and war, um, right? They are potentially risking their own lives, but for a value that they've all bought into.
Yeah. So we've been talking for the better part of 40 minutes here, and I've already jotted down a number of things here that I'm going to put into my show notes because I think there's just a lot here in terms of some of the stats and kind of how culture fit versus culture add. Talk to me a little bit about how so let someone say somebody's listening into this and they love love what they're hearing. All right, so how do I do this, right? How do I lean into this? How do I make this happen? There's like 50,000 questions that are probably rattling around in their head at this point. Where do I start? What would you say, Ben?
I think we've kind of talked about these in a logical order, right? If you're not crystal, if this is a business owner or a CEO or the president of an organization or the leadership team that's having this conversation either with themselves or with their peers, you need to step back and make sure, have they very clearly defined and communicated why the organization exists, what their vision and mission, and do they intentionally thought about the alignment of the work that gets done in alignment with those things, right? There's plenty of examples from the world of sales, right? If you incentivize people, if you have an expectation for a particular product to be sold, yet your incentive structure doesn't square with that, your salespeople will never meet the targets of the expectations because there's not alignment. Right. Same thing goes with any aspect of an organization and its culture and the work that gets done. So if there's not clarity on what that guiding North Star is to kind of capture all those together, if there's not an agreed upon North Star that the organization is pointed towards, well, they got to start there first, right? Because everything then gets derived from that, right? You can't start from the other direction. You have to really start from, why do we exist? What are we here to do? And then how are we going to do things in alignment with achieving that? Right. So that's step one. And then, define, there's a couple different ways to think about the values of an organization, right? You can take a survey of your organization and understand what the values are of the people that are there. Right. And that is what is the current state, right? It is who we are. Now, the executive team may feel that there's a different set of values that the workforce should align with. But if the reality in today's workforce in that organization is that they're not defining what they value in alignment with that, you may have the wrong people on the bus, right? Maybe capable of doing what they're doing, but they're not going to help advance the organization on a variety of variables, right? And so thinking about what are the values, what are the ethics, what are the attitudes, what is it that this is some of the softer stuff, but I wouldn't call it soft and squishy. This is real, right? Because work doesn't get done without humans, and humans have behaviors and they have values and they have things that make them tick and make them feel certain ways, right? So it has to be attended to, but it's not the only thing that needs to be attended to. So once you understand what your direction is, and then we'll characterize it as maybe your workplace contract, if you will, right? What are those things that we agree that we're going to behave in alignment with? Right. Once we've got those things defined, then we can start designing everything that we do from there in alignment with that. Right. So are we, our attraction and selection processes, right? How do we hire people? How do we onboard people? What is that candidate experience and what is that employee experience going to be like? Right. Now, again, I said at the beginning that cultures aren't good or bad inherently. They are what they are, and you can let them happen or you can drive them and create them. Right, intentionally. And so if you're doing it intentionally and you find that you have half your workforce that's not aligned with the values of the leadership team, there's a huge disconnect there. And there's going to be a lot of ramifications from that disconnect in a variety of ways that's going to cascade through the organization. So you may need to figure out, can we live with those results or those impacts? Or do we need to get, or do we need to slowly over time get the right people that can do the same job as the people that we have now, but then align in order to add to our culture and not detract from the culture, right? Because people aren't aligned with your values and they're behaving aligned with other values, even if those are valued by the other people, but they aren't the defined values of the organization, they may lead the organization down a path the organization doesn't want to go to. And if they define that North guiding star, they may not ever achieve that in reality.
So this is interesting. I just had a conversation a little earlier today. We as a company, we've recently implemented a new project management system. So task management, project management system. So the head shed as well as the front line folks are on the similar sheet of music, at least. Some people haven't jumped on to the system yet, and it's been about 2 or 3 weeks now that we've been using it. And the person who has kind of spearheaded this, the question I asked them is, have you had a conversation with everyone else who's not jumped on? What is the value of the system for them? Right? I'm sure we've told them 1,000 times now why they should do it for the company. But have you asked them why it's important to them? And if they can't clearly articulate it, I'll tell you where I think the problem may exist. Right? They're not jumping on board because they're not getting any juice out of that squeeze, right? And I think what I'm hearing here from, have you clearly communicated what we do? That's not it's a dialogue. It's not a speaking at, right?
Correct.
So when you clearly communicated what you do, that's the first step, really, right? It's all right. I'm telling you, I've put it up on my walls. Here are our core values. Here's our mission as a company. Without looking at that wall, can you tell me in your own words, what is our mission? What do we do? Why do we exist? Why do our customers use us? And if they can't clearly articulate it, it's not necessarily a failure on their part. It's not a matter of really a failure here. It's a matter of let's build greater congruence or alignment. Am I distilling that the right way?
Yeah, absolutely. And you made an interesting turn of phrase there where you said you have the values up on the wall. I would suggest don't put the values up on the wall. Instill the values within your people. Yeah. Right. An example of, you say, how do we get this done in organizations? Right. There's plenty of other things that we can talk about and all those hard elements of the way work gets done. Right. There's plenty to be discussed within that category. But let's talk about, the values alignment piece, because this is critical, right? If you have to have the personal alignment, you have to have the skills and capabilities alignment. And those go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other to have a successful workforce and individuals in the organization. So again, I'm using this case study of the talent acquisition firm I worked with. Fantastic organization. I mentioned that the company's name was an acronym for the core values of the organization: kindness, enthusiasm, learning, accountability, collaboration, and going above and beyond. Right. And so one of the things that we did at our bi-weekly team meetings was someone gave Calica kudos, meaning that you had to catch one of your teammates acting out in a positive way one of the core values, and then and then at the meeting you would this is one person each week would do this, would read the core value as it is defined in the company documentation, and you would read it out, right? And then you would read out why it was that you're giving this kudos to this individual for exhibiting that behavior in alignment with that value. And then that person receiving it the company would provide a $20 gift card to one of various choices. And then it was that person's responsibility 2 weeks later to call out one of their teammates for acting in alignment with the core values. So what does this do, right? It does a couple of things. One, it reminds everybody on a multiple times a month in a very explicit way what the core values are. It makes you attuned to the core values because you're looking for the behaviors in your teammates to choose one of them to put up on a pedestal, at the next team meeting. You get a small reward for acting out those behaviors, right? So there's a reinforcement structure in both the understanding of it and then the behavior in alignment with it. Tracked all this stuff as well, right? And leadership would look at that list over time, as it went. If there was somebody that wasn't ever getting kudos, that's a place to dig in maybe and understand, why is this person never getting caught, acting out the core values of the organization. So it was a very interesting way to build in a conversation about the values of the organization and how to behave in alignment with it without preaching or lecturing or telling, but letting it be an organic observation and reinforcement of the importance of it from the workforce and not from leadership.
Interesting.
Fascinating way, and then tied with that, right? How do you continue to reinforce those things on a regular, recurring basis so that it doesn't die on the vine? People define them, put them on the wall, and they die on the vine, right? Because it's not talked about on a regular basis. So build in ways to communicate it without having it be a lecture, right? Without having it be an educational event, but have it be a series of activities that reinforce it, right? And that happen on a daily basis, right? So I thought that was a fascinating way to reinforce that, because that was so important to the organization.
Yeah, that's pretty slick way of doing that.
It's all about sustaining it, right? You got to define it and you got to create it, and then you've got to sustain it over time. And then you've got leadership that has to model the behaviors, right? And if somebody isn't modeling the behaviors, regardless of what level they're at in the organization, some type of mitigation probably needs to come into play, whether it be a conversation or a employee improvement plan or whatever it may be. If somebody, or maybe it just, this isn't the right organization for you, and let's help you find another place to where you're a better fit, right? They're having the right people and having them bought into this. If you have people that aren't bought into the values, they're not going to perform in alignment with what needs to be done. I mean, they don't feel part of the team. They don't feel part of the organization. They feel like an outsider, and not everybody is going to be the same, but people need to feel like they're valued and they've got something to add.
Here's the other thing that I think is coming out of this is, if we know that we're going to Disney World, right? The roadmap to getting there, literally the roadmap to getting there, is much easier to define. I know I need to go down 95, I-95 to get down there because it's going south. That's heading me in the general direction, but I'm not going out on I-64 or whatever road there is, because that's not taking me where I want to go. But if we translate that into a workplace, if everybody knows we're going to Disneyland, or whatever that iteration or that North Star is for that organization, it's a roofing company, pest control company, really any type of company. If they understand where they're trying, where the outcome or what the outcome is supposed to look like, they can keep themselves off of those side roads and the diversions that take them in the wrong direction. And it also allows them to be more aware or cognizant of when they don't know the answer, so they can ask, as in, hey, I think I've gotten off into a detour here, and I don't know that I'm heading the right direction. I can raise my hand and say, I think I need a little bit of help here. It allows, in that sort of situation, allows them to, that humility, it allows space for that humility to occur, because I know I'm trying to get there, but I'm over here. What do I do? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, absolutely. And this gets at the point of people need to feel psychologically safe to speak up in an organization. They need to be able to express their concerns in a constructive way. They want to know that even if a decision isn't made in their favor, that at least they were heard, right? And that there was somebody willing to listen. And while it may not align with everything else, but it creates that space for vulnerability, that, failing forward, if you will, the ability to say, hey, I don't know, and I don't have to have all the answers, but we can work together to get this solved, right? That's another very important piece of the culture, right? And that kind of gets wrapped up within the values of the organization. But do we value input and a diversity of voices? And do we value making sure people feel heard, even if the chips don't fall in their favor?
So this is really interesting, because I don't know, this is a relatively recent example. I talked about that project management system. The person on my team who brought that forward isn't that's not necessarily their responsibility, but they know that as more transactional things occur in the business, that there's a need for that. So they picked up the phone, and we have this once a week meeting, in this case, a 30-minute meeting, just checking, hey, what can I do for you? Is kind of the stage as me to her. She said, I think we need a way to manage some of these projects. As we scale here, we're going to have a system. I said, wait, why were you thinking about that? She said, just because it's going to start getting transactionally a lot more stuff happening. We need something there. So that's really interesting, because I just, about 2 hours ago, I hung up with somebody else and I just had a conversation about, what, as a company, we need to start thinking about a project management system. I was like, how the hell did that happen? Right? I mean, it's not, and I like to believe that as part of the culture, she saw the outcome that we're trying to head to, and that alignment led her to the same conclusion that, she's a more junior person in the organization, but she's seeing the same thing I'm seeing. And that just made, the phrase I remember is, it warmed the cockles of my heart. My gosh, she's thinking like that. That's fabulous. And I think the lesson learned, or the story to tease out from that, is if we're all aimed at the same goal or the same outcome, bringing those other perspectives in, they're also trying to solve that same problem that you don't have to solve then. And which I then went to her and said, great. Well, I've got to think a couple of things in terms of requirements, I think, for a project management system. Do you mind running with this? Now all of a sudden she's the hero, because she's built the system and I don't have to touch it, which is the best place for me to be as a boss, the leader of the company. I didn't have to spend but 20 minutes giving her a couple of ideas and feedback, and it's working, which is fabulous for me. And I think that's the benefit of what a good culture can do for you. Is that fair?
You empowered an individual to take responsibility, to contribute to the value chain within the organization, allowing them to tie what they're seeing from an analysis standpoint, what the future can hold and what it takes to get there. And they were rewarded with the ability to make that happen, right? This person is probably delighted, but they had extra work that wasn't in their lane.
She did it on her own time, which... That's fabulous.
This is absolutely fantastic, right? And one of the things you mentioned earlier too, in reference to this project management tool, in asking the question, did you speak to everybody, right? That's change management 101, right? Does everybody understand what the value is to them, not just the value to the initial sponsors of whatever the initiative or the project is, right? Once you can get the buy-in from all stakeholders, then you've got everybody pushing in the same direction, and you don't have people trying to pull it off course or people trying to sabotage it, right? It's fascinating when you start thinking about organizations as a interrelated set of components that create a system, and knowing that if you push this button, something pops out over here. If you pull this lever, something comes in over here, right? You've got to think about all of those different elements in terms of the culture as well. Because if you try to just push on one lever to try to change culture, you're going to fail, right? It is a holistic effort. And this gets to the point of culture is hard. I mean, people think it's fluffy, soft, and squishy. It is not. That's what they default to, because culture is hard. There's a lot of work. You've got to address the entire organization and how things get done. You've got to look at your processes. You got to look at your standard operating procedures. You have to look at your employee handbook. You have to think about how do we talk about things? How do we do things? You've got to do some deep analysis. You have to really, truly understand how your organization operates. And then you've got to think about, is all this in alignment with what we want it to be or who we want to be? And then you've got to start breaking it down into, well, what's manageable for us to do today? Right? What's the low-hanging fruit that we can get out of the way? Although, thinking about it in terms of how is it going to impact the system when we do this, right? You're implementing a new project management tool. Great. Are people being incentivized to use it? Is there a carrot and a stick methodology in place to make sure that if people aren't using it and they're still tracking things, on paper or in spreadsheets and not using the system, where there's visibility to the rest of the team and value to the rest of the team? Is there some type of negative consequence for them not coming on board with that, right? Or if they're allowed to continue to doing it, then an example is set that you don't have to join what the rest of the team is doing, and that will spiral out of control in the future, right? So the system aspect is in the alignment aspect, and the analysis and the understanding is absolutely the starting point, right? That's the critical point, because if you don't have that, you can't make changes in an intentional, thoughtful way.
Yeah.
And then, you can't do it all at once, right? So it's a one bite of the elephant project, right? It's not a, hey, we're going to reform the culture, by the end of the year. It's not happening. Sorry, right? This is something that size of the organization, the complexity of the organization, how long the organization's been around, all of these things are going to play into how easy or hard, or maybe it's how hard or how less hard it's going to be to address. And because it's hard and it's complex, people shy away from it and they don't know where to start.
Yeah.
Right. So, for leaders that are self-aware and know what they don't know, and know that there's plenty of things that other people can, educate them on. Sometimes it takes bringing in a consultant. Sometimes it takes bringing in an expert. Sometimes it takes doing some study, right? Not only by the leadership, but by the team, in order to make sure that you're pointed in the right direction, because you don't want to create negative impacts on the organization by making changes that are directed in a positive direction, right? And so you can sabotage yourself by taking some of these things from the wrong direction, and bringing in somebody that's got a structured way to take those bites of the elephant is probably a pretty significant value out of that spend, as compared to the negative ramifications and the negative ROI that you'll get on actions that you'll take that may negatively impact the organization.
Yeah, the way I might summarize all of that is I actively tell everyone on my team that my role is to get to myself to where I can, lace my fingers behind my head and just kind of lean back and put my feet up on my desk. I said, that's me doing a great job, which basically means that every one of you understands exactly what you've got to do. And when I first started saying that, I was like, oh God, what a conceited guy I am to talk like that. But I think actually everyone enjoys that and is actually trying harder and harder to push me out of the way, which I absolutely love, because now I'm starting to focus more and more on the stuff that I love to do. And they're saying, this is mine. I'll take care of this. Gosh, what a fantastic place where people are competing to take things off my plate. And I think that's at least in the culture I believe we've got in our company, that's sort of what has come forth. Everyone says, hey, I want to put the flag in the ground here and claim that is my own. And what else back away? I own this. I'll take it. And there's so much more to claim, which is what is exciting. I was reading some, just as I was reading some of the fun facts about you, Ben, just to give a little more dimension to who you are, Spartan racer, runner, hiker, rock climber. I love this stat. You visited almost half of all of the national parks. How do you find time to get to all those national parks? They're all over the place.
Open PTO plan, man. Own my own business now. No, all jokes aside, very fortunate that my wife and I's circumstances allow us to do that, right? She's got a very solid job. She's been there for over 20 years, and she's got lots of PTO. The company allows her to carry over, so we've got time available there. We've been married 9 years. 6 of those, I was 7 of those. I was 6 of them with an organization that had an open PTO plan, and now I've got my own business, so I have a lot of flexibility in how I allocate that time. We did 13 national parks in 1 year in 2017. Wow. We did pretty much everything in California and Colorado and Florida that year. We're going to do 2 next month. In Ohio and then in Michigan. So we're going to do time there. We do a lot of long weekend trips. It matters what you prioritize, right? We're also fortunate in some regards in that we don't have children. We got married later in life and decided that we weren't going to have children. So that frees up a lot of our time, quite frankly, a lot of our time and resources to be able to travel and not have to worry about those, detracting from, a college savings plan or something of that sort. So we do have the flexibility, both from a time standpoint, from a financial standpoint, and from a priority standpoint of what we like to do and how we like to engage in the world.
Well, that's I'll tell you, the closest we come to that is I have 3 kids. So usually when we go to national parks, my middle one, my daughter, has got one of those junior park ranger passports. And she is very vigilant about her when we go to a national park, getting that stamped, right? And going through the swearing in ceremony at every single one of them. So But we've I don't know that we're at half, roughly half of them. We're probably at maybe a quarter of them at best. But there are some beautiful places to see in the United States of
And
America, that's for sure.
and we're fortunate that we're both willing to sleep on the ground, and so we get to, we get to really get deep into these places. We tend to find the paths less traveled in the national parks. We like to get out into the backcountry and really get out there miles and hours away from where the tourists generally go, and give us the opportunity to really explore the wild places in their wild state, and not in the car tour, right? When we've never done the car tour of the Smoky Mountains, which is the way the majority of the visitors in the Smoky Mountain National Park travel it. We come in through side entrances and take 3-day backpacking trips, right, deep into the wilderness, as opposed to stopping off at the roadside attraction. So we definitely do them a little bit different way as well.
Well, it's that actually sounds really, really nice.
If you like sleeping on the ground.
Sure. Well, hey Ben, I really have enjoyed this conversation. Again, every time I talk with you, I get some things that sharpen my knowledge and understanding of the world. So, thank you so much for sharing some time and dropping so many nuggets of insight. I'll tell you that I put a star next to culture fit and culture add. Man, I love that speak. Are you like us, or do you expand us? I really like that sort of mindset there. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun, Vinay.
Absolutely.